You're
Welcome
muted.
everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on entrepreneurs to rethink business. We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Smith and Professor Rob. I just want to share very good news with the audience of World Talent Economy Forum. Tomorrow we have a very big celebrations in Bangladesh. It's called Kumilla Birds and we have around 246 entrepreneurs. We develop these entrepreneurs
hmm
and financially and economically these 246 entrepreneurs they become successful. So World Talent Economy Forums, we're gonna train these people and we will celebrate these things. Definitely it will be in offline, but I want to give a special, very special thanks to our honorable speakers, those who regularly join in World Talent Economy Forum and motivating our people, sharing their knowledge, inspire our peoples, and this way we are uplifting the communities. And beside that, we are collaborating with 2 million peoples in Lokhipur. So definitely we will uplift these 2 million people next 3 years. So thank you, Professor David Smith and Professor Rob, for your excellent support for World Talent Economy Forum. Professor David Smith, what do you want to share about entrepreneurs to rethink business? Uh, and what will be the futures?
Well, Sharif, thank you so much, and enjoy tomorrow. Um, Entrepreneurship is a wonderful, exciting experience, and it's also a scary experience as you go through it. Being an entrepreneur is not for the weak of heart, but it is one of the most successful, satisfying things you can begin to do. And what does it take to be a successful entrepreneur? What does success even mean today? And you never can really prepare for all the slings and arrows of entrepreneurship. And starting a new company from scratch with a new idea that's unproven is one of the hardest things you can ever do. And obstacles are going to come your way, particularly during the early years. And many entrepreneurs start a company while they still have another job, they still have other lives out there. And it's really hard creating the balance. So let's start with a little bit of an entrepreneur thing. An entrepreneur's job is to innovate, is to create something new, to satisfy new careabouts in the marketplace, to really look at how to do things that are not just a me too most of the time. And entrepreneurs create jobs. They grow products, create products and services, and they grow revenues. But you really have to understand if you have the what's in you to rethink how you're going to be an entrepreneur and how you're going to go forward, because it's not a zero sum game. Just last night, one of my partners and also business partners, we were talking about Elon Musk and how Elon Musk is a total risk taker. And if you look at him as an entrepreneur, you see that and how he goes, but how it begins to affect even those around him. But part of the topic today is really going back and saying, how do you rethink your business as an entrepreneur, and how you're going to put those elements to do. And adoption, rethinking has always been a natural consequence of problems and chaos. And when change comes, or companies are tasked with an option: do you fight or do you give in and do things? And it's a system that has worked really in nation with nature for billions of years. So let's go back and think about the last couple of years. In a big way, the pandemic has been this sort of change catalyst. All of the parameters which companies have operated before are different now. And, entrepreneurs who want to survive and become stable again must evolve their goals, their methods, even their supply chains and everything, because of the intense supply chain disruptions. So, one of the things that makes entrepreneurs successful is that when you see this type of way where you have to rethink your entrepreneur dream, So instead of seeing a challenge, what you see are opportunities. And you have to begin to explore your various scenarios and proactively make the right game plan. And at the center of this is a fantastic opportunity to reevaluate your why, your what are my care abouts, what are my customer care abouts, and what are we doing this? And one of the secrets to success for an entrepreneurs is to have a reason why that coincides with your inner sense of purpose, that coincides with the things that you want to make a difference with, and what gives you the drive to succeed and motivates you to take action. Um, that is something that we're really seeing more and more entrepreneurs do it. It's all about many ways making a better life for people we love, but it's also increasingly today with social entrepreneurship, looking at things, how can I do things different and make a difference in the world? And and so you really have to hone in on that why as you do things differently in today's world. Um, and part of the way you rethink it is you have to go and say, I, as an entrepreneur, how do we learn to read what the shifting political and economic climate is? In the United States today, we are already in a recession, whether we want to believe it or not, and hopefully it will be a short one. But how do we read the room? How do we look at the future? How do we want to readjust ourselves so our business will thrive? and and there's a lot going on in the world today. I mean, if I was an entrepreneur in Europe, I have a totally different set of things. It's not just the impacts from the economics. It's just not the impacts from the pandemic, but also with the war in Ukraine and how that has disrupted everything. And how does it impact me? One of the other things you see very strongly during rethinking entrepreneurship today is um, the concept of teams in an entrepreneur startup has changed. I can remember the very first startup I did. I wanted all my team members in the same room with me. And that way we were able to create the group intelligence and things necessary to be successful. Today, in some of our startups, we have team members in Asia, team members in Europe, team members in the Caribbean and South America and Latin America. And so we're spread out and we use team members where we can find the right competencies and capabilities. And yes, particularly for a startup at the right cost, because cash is king in most startups. And today, the other thing that entrepreneurs need to do to rethink business is today's economic environment is one where it's really difficult to raise money now. Most of the super angels I know, most of the VCs I know will not fund you at all if you're not in revenue. And so for an entrepreneur, the question is, how can I take my money? How can I take friends, family, and fools' money and leverage it to get me into revenue so I can go into a funding round? And that's one of the big places entrepreneurs are having to rethink business today is how do I fund that initial part till I have an MVP uh, product, a minimal viable product and be able to generate some revenue. So, Sharif, I think that's a good intro, at least from my side. I will tell you, I have scars on not only my back, but my chest and every place else from weathering the storms of entrepreneurship, having been a serial entrepreneur and have started a fair amount of companies. And just now starting some more companies in the last couple of weeks. Um, it's an exciting time and it's a scary time. So thank you, Dr. Sharif.
Thank you, Professor Rob.
So new companies fail at a fairly significant rate, and the reason often comes down to one of three things. bad operational management, lack of market for the product, and timing. And what's really changed over the last couple decades, and like David, I've done a number of startups over the years, is the fact we have access to information like never before. And while when I was coming into the market, the way you kind of tested whether there was a market for the product is you built it and saw if anybody wanted to buy it. You can pre-test now, and you can do it fairly cheaply. Large companies back then clearly could do market testing and the rest, but if you were an entrepreneur, there's no way you had a small firm, there's no way you had a budget to do that, and so you tended to test live. Another issue as you're coming to market is making sure that you have a clear goal with regard to the outcome that you want. A lot of people build businesses with the idea that they're going to be the next Elon Musk, and that normally ends very badly. Building a company with the express purpose of creating personal wealth is probably going to be a bad idea, because you're going to focus on the wrong things, and you're going to go for those wealth benefits before the company is able to sustain them. Chasing money at any level can be problematic. I remember in one of the firms I worked for, we made the claim we're at $750 million a year. We made the claim we were going to get to a billion. We're going to go to a billion. No, I take that back. We were $750 million a year, $1 billion, and shortly thereafter we went to $250 million. And the firm pretty much collapsed under its own momentum. So because our costs still stayed where they were at $750 million. In the end, you want to make sure your focus remains on the solution, on the customer. You need to understand the market, the competitive dynamics, and you need to understand what the market's going to be like when you're ready to provide a solution. A lot of companies fail, as I mentioned, because of timing. The amount of effort it takes them to bring their service or product to market, their view remains static. The market does not, and by the time they come to market, they've missed the opportunity. Maybe a huge opportunity when they started, and then our opportunity can evaporate by the time they're done. What's really changing right now is the introduction of artificial intelligence, particularly generative AI, though there's some transformative AI going on. I just interviewed a young company that's starting up using transformative AI, which is a previous generation. But using artificial intelligence as a force multiplier, and understanding its application to the entire business, whether it's operational or product related, depending on what it is you're doing, and robotics. There is a global problem with regard to maintaining staff, whether it's because of economic issues, you can't afford to pay what the region requires for a living wage, which is often what happens in Silicon Valley, where I spent much of my life. The disparity between what a company is willing to pay and what it costs to live in the area has become a huge problem. Another issue is you just simply don't have the skill sets in the country or region you're in. You can now, though, where we couldn't previously reliably use a remote workforce, but you better understand how to manage them, and you have to have a high degree of trust that remote workforce won't sell you out. There were early on companies that were outsourcing things to India, were substantial examples of where they could spin up a company in India. They'd get everybody hired, and within a month or a month and a half, those people all left and took everything with them when they went, and set up a competitive company in the same venue, which was kind of problematic, given you just invested a crap ton of money in a foreign country that you clearly didn't understand the dynamics in. So in the end, it really comes down to understanding the market, understanding the product, and making sure you have a well-rounded set of skills, which includes financial skills. I think David mentioned raising money. If you don't know how to raise money, right, and you don't really enjoy the glad handing that goes with it, entrepreneurship, unless you're independently wealthy, is probably not going to be for you. Raising money is whether it's politics or business, at the early phases is critical, and you're going to have to do it a number of times. The amount of money that you get up front is probably not going to carry you through the different phases. You've got your startup phase, your transition phase, and your sustaining phase. And by the way, studies years ago showcased that the same CEO was rarely capable of handling all three phases. A startup CEO can struggle with transition and can get bored in sustaining and start causing problems. A lot of the issues we're seeing, I think, with Elon Musk is the fact he's kind of a startup CEO, did all right on transition, but he gets bored when he gets to sustaining and starts making problems for the companies that he's managing. He just has too much free time, and the things that have to do with sustaining a company just don't interest him. And I don't blame him. When you get to the sustaining phase, it's about keeping a bunch of balls in the air. It's largely administrative. A lot of the fun and camaraderie goes south. You are now, to a large extent, isolated and need to be. You're focused on investors and investment rules. In the United States, you have to worry about the SEC. These are things you typically don't have to worry about in the early phases of a startup before you go public. And then as you think about the end game, because you need to have in your head what the end game is going to be. A lot of people figure the end game is I will make something, I'll sell it to Google or Microsoft and get rich, and then I'll go off and be happy. Well, you might want to do a little life planning as well. Because often when people have that plan, one is it doesn't execute, and so they end up with a company that's crippled because they're always planning on having some bigger company pay the bills that particular phase, and if that doesn't happen, you're kind of screwed. The other thing is once you're out, now what do you do? This is your company, your baby, and your idea. I've seen a lot of folks that did startups that their company was kind of their life, and now they've sold it. And they just don't seem to have a life. And the number of CEOs I've known that just kind of wither away and die after they've got their huge payday is significant. One of the richest guys in Silicon Valley I remember talking to, and you figure he had more money than you could believe, but he couldn't keep a wife to save his life. Massive number of divorces, and he just groused about the fact that nobody took him seriously anymore. Well, because you're not running a company anymore. I said you gave up that position. And that all his friends enjoyed it, all his wealthy toys, but he didn't anymore. It's because he enjoyed the game. And once he took himself out of the game, he didn't really enjoy life anymore. And he died shortly thereafter. So in the end, entrepreneurship is hard. It does require a broad base of skills. It requires a lot of passion for what it is you're doing. And to be successful in it, you need to know what your end game is going to be and kind of how to get there, because otherwise at any phase of this, you can screw yourself and end up where you don't want to be.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Professor David Smith.
Well, as Rob actually said, I view entrepreneurship as a lifestyle. People who are fearful of change do not make good entrepreneurs. People who are not risk takers do not make good entrepreneurs. And Rob's last comments, though, I have seen that as well. I've had friends who've had huge exits, and they've decided they're not going to do anything again and just live off of their exit money. And they're very unhappy. I had one of my former business partners who actually committed suicide after a successful exit, too. And it really is that lifestyle that makes it work for you. And you see that time and time again. But you also see people now today where you see more teams coming together and forming companies and being entrepreneurs. And you're seeing now more people who are working with others to become entrepreneurs in a way that in the past you didn't see that. In the past, some of your entrepreneurs tended to be ones where most of your startup team had been entrepreneurs before, and that's not the case. One of actually a couple of the companies that we're in the process of starting right now, my partner with them has never started a company before in her life and is working with it and is beginning to understand some of the elements you have to do as a startup. And sometimes as a startup, you have to prioritize your interest in a very different way. If I am just in a job where I go to work, collect a paycheck, and go home, I have a lot more ability to go and do the things I want to do at night over the weekend, to travel when I want to travel, to have the free time to do things. And as you're starting a company in particular, uh, you don't have time for all of that. You have to be more focused, more deliberate in what you're doing. And um, and like Rob said, uh, one of the reasons I had to be on the program for a shorter time yesterday is we had a phone call with a potential group of investors, and it's really interesting. For many of my meetings, I can say, no, I have a conflict, then let's change the time. Potential investors don't work that way. They're the most important person, and you have to adapt you to them during startups and things. And raising money is a hard task, particularly when you look that uh, 8 out of 10 startups fail. 1 out of 10 startups succeeds well. The others get by. So you you understand you're moving into a high risk area. Now in services business, the odds are slightly different. I was talking about a product business there. Um, but you see that and you have to adapt to that in your lifestyle because it is a lifestyle business. And you have to understand that you have to really focus on the products and our services you're doing. You have to have a very clear and achievable vision. And your product has to have a unique value proposition in the marketplace. And that's where the success will come from that. And as an entrepreneur, you don't judge whether you're successful or not. It's your customers who judge whether you're successful or not. It's your investors who judge whether you're successful or not. And it's hard for many people to understand that you're not in control of your own destiny. You're really working in an entrepreneur environment to do that. And but fortunately today, there's a lot of resources out there uh, to help you in your startup journey. There's a lot of accelerators, there's incubators, there's groups like Mass Challenge and others like that who can really help you in. I'm on the investment committee and board of the International Accelerator here in Austin, whose purpose is to help companies from developing nations come and be successful in the United States and have an explicit program for doing that. So there are resources out there and ones which can be exciting. Um, for the International Accelerator, I was on a call a couple of days ago, or a Zoom call, with an entrepreneur in Tel Aviv, which he had gotten an aerospace degree in the United States. The immigration laws changed and couldn't come back. And he's wanting to start a new innovative autonomous drone company to become air taxis. Neat idea, but as you look at it and try to judge his ability to be successful, particularly in the North American market, uh, he was shocked to really understand how expensive it is to do certification, to do things when a human is involved on it. And so our suggestion to him was start as a cargo, as a delivery company. And then as you get money, go into becoming the air taxi. And you've got to be able to shift like that too. Most entrepreneur startups, their product that they're successful with in the market is usually different than the product they started the company with. It morphs and changes over the time. So entrepreneurs have to not only rethink their business in times of global chaos, global change, like the financial situation, the war, the disruption by COVID, the logistic chain disruptions, but they have to rethink their business as a course of business as they try to capture market niches, try to capture customers, try to capture investment, and they will change all of those. One of the most successful people with adapting his message, adapting his products, and adapting his approaches was Steve Jobs at Apple. He's legendary for changing his vision and part of his product descriptions and things as he got feedback from investors. He's got feedback from major customers. And, some people said he adapted too easy. And sometimes the stories he told were not what were in the product plan at all. But you have to begin to understand that you have to be adaptable, and agile is not a statement. It's not just a development approach. Agile is a way of life for entrepreneurs. So, Sharif, thank you for that part.
Thank you, Professor Rob.
Oh, interesting to bring up, Dave brought up Steve Jobs. I knew Steve Jobs, wasn't a fan. When Apple first came to market, they hired a CEO, and second one was really the one that made the difference. What the hell was his name? Mike McCullough, from 81 to 83. Before that, he had Michael Scott. But the founders really didn't take over the company until Steve Jobs came back in 97. Steve Jobs was in some ways brilliant, and in some ways he was a huge problem, and often showcases the issues with an entrepreneurial CEO. Often, when somebody suddenly has people reporting to them and has power, they will abuse that power, and Steve was unfortunately kind of famous for that. David pointed out that Steve could be easily convinced or could be convinced of other things. That's how he was managed. The Apple teams would, their method was pitching Steve an idea and then letting him believe it was his idea so he would carry it forward. It was a highly manipulative organizational structure. Having said that, he was not very successful as a manager before he was fired. And the selection of John Scully as CEO was probably ill-advised. The reason is they rightly assumed that what they needed was somebody that understood marketing, but Apple wasn't a marketing company; they were a product company. They lived on marketing, but somebody coming from Pepsi would have no understanding of the computer market as it existed then or ever. It was a misstep in terms of skills. Now you could point out that the hiring at IBM when it almost went under was something similar. Bringing a guy out of Nabisco to run the company was problematic, but the situation was different. IBM was a turnaround, and they needed somebody that understood how to get a company that was bleeding money at a rate that was unsustainable to stop bleeding money. And the interesting thing is at that time it really wasn't Lou Gerstner that was the pivotal member of I knew a member of IBM's board at the time, and I worked there. And I wrote the paper on their near failure. It was the CFO that turned the company around, and the turnaround stalled when the CFO left and tried to once again take over Chrysler, which failed with Lee Iacocca. So the things you really have to watch out for, I think, as an entrepreneur is not gaining maturity quickly enough. The number of small companies I've seen because they don't have fail because they don't have good expense control are legion. In fact, it was famous during the dot-com collapse in the late 90s. Much of that collapse was caused by a complete lack of understanding for revenue. And a complete lack of understanding for expense control. One startup that I recall, a company called Panda Project, which would have had the potential of being Apple, and it came up at the same time, incredibly innovative products as they were coming to market. But they went through money like it literally growing on trees. They were flying people around on private jets, the palatial offices, mansions, massive salaries. They had a massive amount of initial capital, and they burned through it like nothing I've ever seen. And sadly, that's not uncommon. So it's really good if you're going to do this. You really need to have a passion for what it is you're trying to do, and rather than a passion for wealth and status. If you've got a passion for wealth and status, go into sales. You'll make a ton of money if you're good at it, and you don't have to worry about all the downside. You might want to keep your ethics in line though, because I do know salespeople that get terminated with great fervor who decided to game the system and get caught. So keep your ethics intact. But if you want to if your goal is just money, nothing like sales. So you don't need a lot of education to be good in sales. And you can make some of the when I first started in tech, the sales guys I was working with made more money than the CEO did. The CEO made with stock options, I accumulated more wealth, but in terms of just cash, sales guys outperformed even the top executives that we had. I mean, they made money, and they earned it. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you take that same mentality and put it in to run a company, one of the worst CEOs you can typically have is somebody that came out of sales, because they have almost no expense control capabilities in them, and they're so used to flaunting the rules and getting around them. As a CEO, they have the responsibility for assuring the stockholder value, and that's like putting a fox in charge of the hen house, and it tends to end really badly unless the company is somehow engaged in outsourced sales or something, in which case the sales background would be pertinent. You just have to make sure, again, that the ethics remain in place and the individual doesn't destroy the firm. An example of that was a small family company that I studied years ago, that were the head of IBM sales when he retired. I wasn't a fan of him either, but a whole different story we'll save for another time. He took over the family business because they really wanted to grow the business. It had been successful for decades, but just hadn't grown very big. And they really wanted to be a national, maybe even a multinational entity. And he increased the sales force astronomically. I mean, just massively increased the sales force. And the company ran out of cash, I think about 7 months, and went under, bankrupted, because you can't grow a sales force like that. And here's another issue. A common mistake is to hire a CEO out of a multinational or Fortune 500 firm who has been doing something else. I mean, you're not going to hire an IBM, somebody that's been an IBM CEO to run your small company. But I've seen people hire executives, like I mentioned, that one family out of a multinational, and it almost always goes badly. And that's because when you're working for a large company, there are a lot of dependencies that exist that you don't worry about. You've got these mechanisms that just seem to happen magically behind you. Mature finance organizations, control organizations, sales organizations, service organizations. Depending on what it is you were doing, you might know the organization that you managed, but you don't have to know the others. You should, and if you've been properly mentored, you would. But the number of companies that do cross vertical mentoring, I could count in one hand and probably have 4 fingers left over. So we just don't educate CEOs in large companies, or prep for people being the CEOs in large companies, like once was done in a number of firms. And that means the executives you have in large firms are not well-rounded. And to run a small company, you have to be well-rounded. And so your better choice for bringing somebody on board is somebody that has been successful bringing up a small company in the industry that you're in, or somebody that has shown good management chops, again, in the industry that you're in, but typically working in small groups with either a small division or a small company. They would have been forced to learn the other skills they need to run that small firm. And part of your background check and looking at those people is to assure that they've got that breadth. You're going to assume they know whatever it was they were doing. What you've got to do is assure they know the other parts of the business that they wouldn't have naturally picked up in the job that they had. You want breadth in the CEO. I recall Jim Barksdale, who was brought in to run Netscape, who I also know personally, won $100 off him on a bet. Just a horrible choice in CEO. Good guy, competent manager, but didn't really. I mean, at the time, almost nobody knew the internet. But it would have been far better to have somebody that was at least experienced in the software business, as opposed to somebody that was experienced in enterprise. And so what Barksdale did is he tried to spin Netscape into becoming Microsoft, declared war on Microsoft, it would be kind of like if that kind of war would be like Ukraine declaring war on Russia rather than Russia declaring war on Ukraine. It just it was going to end really badly, because if if Ukraine had declared war on Russia, they'd get none of the support from the West that they currently have, and Russia would just roll right over them. And that's kind of what happened to Netscape. And the screwy thing is 90% of the reason Netscape went under was Netscape screw ups. Not anything that Microsoft did to them, but Microsoft made sure, because they were going to war with them, that they really couldn't get any extra capital, because nobody believed you could take on Microsoft like that and go head to head. So their ability to raise capital was limited. So on top of the fact that they needlessly stuck a burr in the bear's butt and focused Microsoft on them. They had no idea what it was they had, and as an end result, they destroyed it. And so it's really important that leadership understands the dynamics of the market in which they are operating. The guy that's running the company is the one that's supposed to set the vision, but you cannot set a vision if you don't understand the market or the technology or the customers. You can't. You're just too separate from those elements, and you need all three of those things to set a strategy. And now, speaking of strategy, small companies tend to operate tactically. It's part of their nature. Because you're dealing with payroll on a daily basis. It's once you get established, you often don't have the financial. Well, you can if you're having a down year, but generally once you get established, your concerns really are about market expansion, diversifying your product set, and doing things like that. When you're starting up, you spend a lot of time sweating whether you can make payroll and pay the rent and do things like that. And so you tend to think tactically. And the problem with that is you still have to keep an eye on where it is you're going. If you're just fully operating tactically, then you're moving on events, and your course is going to look like. Once helmed a 450-foot freighter, and they put me in behind it, and they immediately took me off, because if you look behind, it looked like I was drawing these big, huge S's through the ocean, which is expensive when you're riding, burned undoubtedly a lot of fuel. I shouldn't, but it takes a skill to be able to anticipate where the ship's going to go to create a straight course. And often they just put it on autopilot, and the computer took it over. But an experienced helmsman could steer straight, because they kept their eye on the horizon, and so they were always focused on where the ship needed to be, less focused on where the ship was. And that's the nature of how you run a company. You need to keep a tactical focus, but you also need to don't forget your strategic goals, because if either one of those fails, you're going to fail. If you don't follow if you don't keep the rent paid and payroll up, your people are going to leave, and they're going to evict you from your building, and you're out of business. But on the other hand, if you don't know where you're going, well, Yogi Berra says you're probably not going to get there. So in the end, that it requires a great deal of maturity and understanding to lead a company as it advances. And if you lack that, you're not the guy to lead it. And if you hire that maturity, which isn't a bad idea, they still have to have that leader still has to have a deep enough understanding of the market, the operations that have to occur to make that market, to be successful in that market, and then be able to establish a strategic goals so the company can survive what's to come. And the good news is, with the massive amount of information we currently have, the kind of intelligence that small companies couldn't get when I was starting up, you can get, and so don't lose track of that. So in the end, things in some ways have become easier, but in others, because the markets are changing so incredibly quickly right now, they become far harder.
Thank you. Professor Deputy Smith.
Rob, I loved your story there. I fortunately, during my career, have been able to do startup coaching and things in both North America, South America, Europe, and Asia. And what is very interesting is when you get together with a group of startup founders, you always hear the stories like Rob was telling there about some of the challenges, some of how rough it is. In fact, Rob, I will advertise the website I bought, a domain I bought to you that I think you might enjoy with your stories. I was saying in a meeting, we were talking about entrepreneurship, and I ended up during the meeting going online and buying the website, well, the domain entrepreneur. And because oftentimes when you have entrepreneurs saying together, you hear the stories of how tough it is, how bad it is, the mistakes they make. And and my mind just said that was a great website to have at some point down the road. And I've had it parked for quite a while over on the side. With all the challenges in today's entrepreneurship environment, that might be the time to put that domain on the market and sell it. But it's one of the things that is actually there. Uh, you love hearing the success stories for entrepreneurs. Um, but you also know that there's many more stories out for entrepreneurs that are not as successful, and that is true. Entrepreneurship is hard. Rob used the example of some of the larger companies when IBM was going through transitions and things. It was a hard time there, and in some ways, IBM had to get an entrepreneur spirit to survive, and that was part of what happened uh, after Lou Gessner left and things. I did a project for IBM during that time with the company I was at called Technology Futures. And we, at that time, uh, were asked by the CTO at IBM to look at their portfolio of patents and see how their patents were used in IBM. And it was a very interesting project. Fewer than 10% of the IBM patents ever showed up in products. Um, and you see things, but it's the other thing that most entrepreneurs get wrong is they underestimate the worth of their intellectual property they're creating. And you kind of have two camps in that. Um, and what you really need is a camp in the middle. Some entrepreneurs want to patent everything, which is a mistake for most startups. Um, because when you file patents, you have to give most of your secrets away to get the patent. And you don't have enough money in your bank to defend it against a big company. And they will draw litigation out and stuff. So, one of the things you want to do in the early stage is keep more trade secrets. You can begin the process for patents and things, but trade secrets are really one of the keys during the startup phase. The other mistake many entrepreneurs make is they give their ideas away. They give some of their secrets away because they think that creates a better brand for them. And they don't realize as people with more funding can often go speed to market. One of the Asian companies that we've done work with in the past, uh, based in South Korea, had a meeting with their innovation group, and he was very blunt on it. He says, you know, I have 2,000 engineers sitting by that I can take your idea and beat you to speed of market by great orders of magnitude. He says, and we do that often. We'll take good ideas, we'll put it in our large engineering groups, and we'll take it to market faster than an entrepreneur can. So as entrepreneurs rethink business and things, you really have to spend time understanding the impact of your intellectual property. We've talked about intellectual property, we've talked about the culture of startups, we've talked about raising money, uh, and we've talked about the impact of entrepreneurship on your lifestyle. And all of these come to play during those. And you have to be very careful with how you apply them. The other part of an entrepreneur journey that I think I see mistakes in so often is during the startup phase of a company, you have to be out and about. You have to network. You have to go to trade events that are appropriate and be there to to not only be seen but to listen, to do competitive analysis, and to do those elements. I I believe one of the things that makes the difference between startups that succeed in startups that fail is that leaderships of those that succeed understand the power of the network. They understand the power of relationships. I would much rather have very strong relationships and be able to leverage them and work with them, for them to help open doors, for them to help bring the right people at the right time into the company, than to have, in some ways, more money. Because relationships, in some ways, are worth more than cash at times. And it's hard for startups to understand that, but it's one of the key things I think that makes a difference. And uh, I see, Rob, you're running the show right now. Do you would like to go to leave?
Yeah, we can. I believe you. Do you have something that you'd like to add? Your also, if you would, when you're not speaking, you can mute your mic because we can hear you eating, and it's a little distracting. But yeah, do you want something to add here? Yes, no, maybe not. Well, let me fill some gaps since we don't have dead air. So there's some interesting thoughts about, and we've pointed out a lot of the negatives and problems with entrepreneurship. Let me talk about some of the positives. Typically, when you work for a large company or any firm, you're doing the same thing over and over again. If you're in accounting, you probably spend your life in accounting. There are programs and companies that provide lateral movement. I would recommend if you're working for a company, you might want to explore some of those because breadth is good. But in a startup, you get a lot of breadth. You're not doing the same thing every day. It can be very exciting. A lot of the times, the people that you're with in a startup can become lifelong friends. I mean, you're basically going to war like you're in a platoon in an army. You become very close. You're working long hours. You quickly recognize, though, and need to recognize that are people in those environments that can be really great folks to work with. There are people in those environments can be incredibly abusive, and so if you're in an environment that's abusive, get the hell out. There's no point in writing any of that through. Life is too short. But if you're in a startup where you're kind of like family, everybody's working long hours, everybody's got everybody's back. That's an amazing experience. I mean, just really, I think everybody at one time or another should work in a startup just to see what work can be like. And yeah, the hours are long. I mean, they're just no. If you're figuring it, a startup work is going to be a couple months of hard work, and then you'll be retiring in Panama on a mansion with a big yacht. Not going to happen. On the other hand, if you get into the startup and figuring out, it's like you're going to war with your comrades, your buddies, and kumbaya. You're eating together. You might be sleeping in the same rooms together, on and off. And if you can kind of keep it in your pants, because a lot of that crap comes on in startups as well, then you can have a great experience. Startups are awesome with regard to building friendships, building relationships, and really learning how businesses work. It's really hard to get a sense going to work in a multinational. I've worked for several of those too. It's really hard to get a sense for how a company operates if you work for a multinational. There's just too many people and too many things going on at once that you're not going to touch or see. But in a startup, everybody pretty much sees everything, and so you get a sense for how things work together that you just simply won't get in school, and you won't get in a large company. And so it's a tremendous experience. Now there are people that are serial entrepreneurs. They do startups after startup, and God love them. That's great. But that can tear you apart. I mean, doing 18 hours a day for 30 years you're gonna pay a toll, and work-life balance is going to be one of them. And one of the issues, of course, with startups is a lot of times your kids and your marriage are going to suffer. So making sure that doesn't happen has to be part of your plan, because again, it doesn't do you any good to be successful and your entire family hates you when you're done. And now what are you going to do when you do finally retire? So work-life balance has to be something you just kind of have to think about, but not so aggressively that you don't accomplish your goals in the startup. And so there's balance. But But entrepreneurship can be a ball. I mean, really, it's some of the most exciting times I've had. The stories I can tell probably shouldn't about things that have gone on in startups I've worked for that were just a hoot, and the offsites, the strategy sessions, the struggles to solve problems where the entire team comes together and works to solve the problem, so you never stand alone. It's just an incredible experience when it works right. On the other hand, I've also been in startups where it's nothing's working and written them out. And looking back, I think that was wasted time. Nobody needs to be ensconced in people doing things badly. And if you find yourself in a company, I was in one company where the guy running it would have a different girl into his office every afternoon, and their heads would go down, and you damn well what they were doing on the floor. And he was married with kids, and his wife would show up every once in a while, and I was pretty much convinced that she was going to shoot us all at some point. That's not a life. You don't need that kind of aggravation, and even the connection to that kind of behavior can do your career damage. I left as soon as it was clear that drugs are coming into the workplace on top of everything else, and I'm out. But I should have left a lot sooner than that. So in the end, startups can be amazing, and entrepreneurship can be a lot of fun. But they can also be very dangerous, and they can be very destructive. And knowing the difference and knowing when to get out, particularly if you're a woman, can be an incredible skill to develop early. Sadly, in tech really isn't a great place for women, except in particular companies and in areas where the focus is on equality and assuring diversity. Those kinds of things are important. If you don't see it, give you an idea. I've had several stories now of people's daughters interviewing in Silicon Valley, and part of the interview is to tell the girls that they'll be servicing their manager on a regular basis, and by servicing I mean having sex with them. And that was in California, where the rules against that kind of behavior are extreme and the penalties are huge, and yet it still is going on today. And that kind of behavior undoubtedly is going on in other countries where those protections aren't in place at even greater levels. And you just don't need that. Don't agree to it. Get out. If you have the ability to litigate, just think through that, because it can damage your career aspects as well. Get away from it, though. That is not something you want to do. And one other thing I ran into, one of the reasons I'm not in human resources, when I came to Silicon Valley, my predecessor had faced down a husband with a shotgun who was pissed off because his wife was being abused. And I decided, I just don't need this in my life. And so I changed career paths dramatically. People can get very violent when they're abused, and I've had the experience of violence in the workplace a number of times, and that is life changing and not in a good way. So you want to be in an environment that's conducive to camaraderie, where everybody's together. But if you find yourself in an environment that's hostile, where the guy running the company or any one of the executives has gone off the rails and is abusive, misogynistic, not only against you, but against anybody else, get the hell out and advise whoever they're abusing to get out. And I would also advise you to have their back if you can, because people that are being abused really need all the help they can get. And abused people can end tragically. Anything from suicide to workplace violence. So it's also good to keep an eye on your coworkers. One of the big companies I never went to work for, I instead turned the hiring manager into HR because he put me through an abusive interview, and the woman that went after me came out in tears. And I said, this isn't right. And so while I could handle the interview, the fact that she could not, and she was abused in the interview, was just unacceptable to me. And so I exited the process, turned the manager in, and he was removed from management. But it also meant I wasn't going to get hired there either. But it was a sacrifice I was willing to make to do the right thing. And at the end of the day, you kind of have to look at yourself in the mirror when all this stuff is over. So make sure that you're good with what's happening around you. And if you're not, leave. And if it's really bad, think about speaking up and standing up for your coworkers who are being abused. I think even if it ends poorly for you, you still look back favorably on your behavior. At the end of your life, all you've got are memories, and you want to make sure you can be proud of what it is you've accomplished. And as an entrepreneur, you have a lot more control, but it also means you've got a lot more ability to be abusive and to fight abuse. And I would recommend the latter over the former. Dr. Talib.
You need to
You're
unmute.
muted. You're still muted. You're still muted. We can't hear you. Funny is we could hear you fine a little while ago, but now we can't hear you at all. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
We
You can
can.
hear me now. Okay,
Yes.
good. I said Rob did a great job in summing it up, because he really touched on the issues that I wanted to talk about, which is abuse at work. In big companies, you are likely to be abused, because big companies are that way towards their workers. And being an entrepreneur is self-employment to me. And that's something that's very, very achievable and very, very noble to be. Because when you're self-employed, you can do whatever you want to do. And you could treat your fellow co-workers in a good way, like Rob said. I think that's a very, very important factor here. I'm thinking of developing countries. In the developing countries, we don't have big corporations, but we have corporations that are big enough in relative terms to make the abuse a fact of life. And that's something that we should be against all of our lives. But to go up and start a business now, starting a business is not easy. You know, you need to make sure that the business is a good idea. I think a good idea, because without a good idea, you can't do anything. And I think that's the most important thing here. My son is in Dubai. He left his company and he's starting up a startup now. I think he's doing well. He's doing very well. Now, his company was a good company. He never complained about it. He wanted to do this for a long time. He's having a good relationship with his wife, his daughter, and his son. And that's a good thing to do. Really, I would advise anybody that feels that the work environment is not conducive enough to leave and do something else. Now, you could be the entrepreneur yourself, or you could work to entrepreneurship, one of the smaller setups that are done by individuals that are more talented and can get more how should I say, more space and more imaginative thinking. Now, I want to also comment a little bit on what David said about the issue of secrecy. Now, when you go and become an entrepreneur on your own, you're not careful about what you say or what you don't say. You want the world to know that what you're doing is worthwhile, because you are starting a new business now. That's something we should be careful about, very careful, because if we don't keep our mouths shut when we leave the company, then we are likely to become very much attacked by that. And I think that the secrecy here is a very important factor. Now, my son, on the other hand, did not follow the secrecy method. Everybody knows what he's doing. I know what he's doing. I shouldn't know what he's doing, but I do know, and I think he's proud to saying it to anybody else. His company that he worked in was in tourism. He was in the investment part, and he left to do something else, to change the thing into, those that own shares in the company but can't sell these shares. There are many of those because of many reasons. So he was trying to get them to sell whatever they want to sell, if they want to sell at this time. And he would finish the enterprise. He finished the procedure as we go along. So that's something that I'm telling you now, and I know that I'm not supposed to say that, but he is saying it to anybody that asks him. If he was here with us, he would say the same thing. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sharif, for this important mission. Thank you, Rob and David. Thank you.
Well, thank you as well. Rob, I think we have said most of what we can say on this topic today. I think the topic of entrepreneurs to rethink business is an ongoing topic and something that any entrepreneur needs to do continuously. The pivots that startup companies have made are legendary, where you have a core team with competencies and capabilities, and as you see one market closing, one product not working, pivot to others. So the process of rethinking your business is a continuous process. I'd like to just reemphasize a couple of points. I love Rob's example of steering a ship. I use a different example. There's a reason why the windshield on a car is bigger than the windshield at the back of the car. It's more important to see where you're going than where you've been. Yes, you need to know where you've been, but it's much more important to see where you're going, particularly as an entrepreneur, because that is where you're staking your future on, is where you're going and not where you are. It's important to know for today and put financial controls in, put product controls in, think about early stage branding. Early stage branding is different than later stage. I joined a board of a startup not long ago who was spending vast amounts of money on a marketing firm. They're a year away from a product. And I'm going, no, let's not spend that. Let's go back, conserve cash, wait till the right time, and let's go with that. So you have to think like a startup. Startup think is very different than established big company think. And you're going to end up having to do a lot of stuff yourself. But my final point, and I really want to emphasize this, is have mentors. Join organizations like accelerators, join entrepreneur organizations, get out and network. Sharing of ideas is critical during a startup because you are working in many instances harder than you ever have in your life. And you've got to have a group of people to support you. And the relationships, the mentorships and things are so vitally important. Also, don't be afraid to talk to your mentors, talk to your people you get funding from, and ask them, are there things in their network they can do to support you? During many of my startups, I would go to my funders, my angel investors and others and say, I want to hire for this position. Who do you know? Who do you think? I want to look at this to do other things. What do you think? And how can you use that? So use your networks, use your relationships, and realize they are part of the key to your success. So Rob, I guess back to you. That's my final remarks.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, so looks like we're on closing remarks now. So we mentioned intellectual property, and it's an interesting discussion because a lot of times young companies really don't understand the risks they take by speaking too soon. There was an organization in Microsoft that was set up specifically because so many small companies were coming in and claiming that Microsoft was stealing their stuff, that they actually put it together an organization that was disbanded within months after that. We'll talk about why. That was to help prevent that from happening. But what was occurring was companies would come into Microsoft and they'd open the kimono and they're looking for, Microsoft funding, Microsoft partnership, whatever, and then they leave. And then a few months later or years later, Microsoft would bring out a product that looked pretty close to what the company had been developing. And Microsoft would argue, well, they were developing in parallel already and shared that part with a little company. And the little company would argue, no, you probably weren't. You probably got that idea from me. And there was never any great way to determine who was right. It did create contamination problems for Microsoft. Clearly would have created contamination and market problems for the small company. You need to keep stuff close to the vest. But here's something else about the intellectual property. you do not want to bring intellectual property from where you're working into your new entrepreneurial company. The common practice is for people trying to develop a company on their own is to develop that while they're working for somebody else, not realizing that their employment contract may give their employer ownership of that project because they were working on it either during the time they were actually at work, which has happened way the hell too often, or because they're under salary and there's no defined period of time when they're out at work and when they're not. And so the company can argue they're pretty much always at work. And so any of anything that they develop is really the property of the company that's paying them. You need to create a hard break between wherever it is you're working and whatever it is you're planning on doing once you leave the firm. If you don't, you have a very high risk of the company you're working for coming in and yanking a good deal of the value back, and if not, a good chunk of your revenue, if not just taking over control of your company and owning it after the fact. Intellectual property is something you need to figure out really quickly, particularly if you're coming up with the idea for your new company while you're working for somebody else. You need to know the rules in the country in which you're operating and make sure you protect yourself from your existing firm taking you to court and pretty much putting you out of business and taking your stuff. And it can be pretty ugly. I had a friend of mine that was being recruited by another company doing the same thing, and suddenly she found herself in jail because her boss thought she was stealing intellectual property. She wasn't, and she didn't, but just the suspicion of doing that had her investigated. I had her tossed in jail, and you figure she might have got a hell of a settlement out of it. Well, not really. The company that did that to her went bankrupt and closed down, and so she never really got that much money either. Ended up losing her job, got a reputation for intellectual property theft that she didn't do. And the screwy thing, it was just because at the time she was being recruited, she was taking work home to work at home, and our manager found out about it and assumed she was feeding information to a competitor and took punitive action. So you really need to understand the rules where you're working on. Managers, particularly in larger companies, can be very aggressive if they think you're stealing from them, and the amount of punitive power they have can be extreme. And so you want to avoid even the appearance of wrongdoing here, because at the very least it will damage your reputation, and the most it may cause your existing firm to sue your new startup and put it out of business. So understand the rules surrounding the area that you're in and whatever it is you're developing, and make sure there are no conflicts that can be alleged with regard to you taking information from the company that you're working in and putting in either the company where you're going, because we've had some huge lawsuits with regard to people, say, moving from one car company to another in executive roles. Same thing can happen with small firms. If you leave a company and you develop a product that looks like it plays in that company's venue, there's a really good chance you're going to face legal challenge, and you need to be able to weather it. And you won't if there's been any kind of transfer of information that's crossed from your existing employer or from your old employer to your new company. So learn the rules with regard to intellectual property, and they're different in every country, but you need to know how they operate in the country where you're operating, and make darn sure that you haven't created a huge opportunity for your existing employer to take your work from you at some later date. And that's what I want to leave you with. Talib, any final words?
No, I think you said it all, Rob. I think what we need to summarize in here is what to give advice to the young people on what to do if they are employed in a big company and they come up with a good idea, whether it's from inside the company or from outside the company. It's okay. I think sometimes you get an idea from your work that you're doing in a big company, but you have to follow the rules of that country. That's very important. I think what Rob is saying is very, very important for everybody here. And I think that self-employment here is a good thing, and I would bless it. I would support it. I mean, I would go out of my way to support people that are like that. So, and I'm sure that there are many people like me in this world. So just do what Rob and David has said, and you'll be okay. You'll be okay. You don't have to stand for abuses at all at your work. That's important, because you have to take a stand in this. At the end of the day, if you don't take a stand, you'll be regretting what you do for an entire life. Whether you have a startup or not, you have to take a stand on that. Because we have seen and heard of so many abuses stories in big companies' work. whether it's in America or in Jordan or in Bangladesh or anywhere around the world. Big companies are big companies, and bosses are bosses, wherever they are. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks everybody. It's been another great show. Hopefully Sharif will come back and shut this thing down in a minute, but
Sharif is
here he
back.
is. Dr. Sharif, we're done.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Very good
You're
discussion,
welcome.
especially the entrepreneur emerging economy. And tomorrow we have very, very special day. We already developed 246 entrepreneurs in Bangladesh, and financially everybody successful. That is the objective of World Talent Economy Forum, and hopefully with your support we can uplift more communities. Already the government of Bangladesh, they already collaborate with World Talent Economy Forum with 2 million people. So hopefully our next project will be more successful with your advice, with your guidelines, with your dialogues.
Very good.
Thank you.
Very good.
Bye-bye and take care.
Bye-bye. You're taking a good job, Sharif. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.